Hello, everybody, and welcome back to This Week in Privacy, our weekly series where we cover the latest updates with what we've been working on within the Privacy Guides community. And this week's top stories in the data privacy and cybersecurity space. Privacy Guides is a non-profit which researches and shares privacy-related information, and we also facilitate a community on our forum and matrix where people can ask questions and get advice about staying private online and preserving their digital rights. But before we dive into this week's show, here's a rundown of what we'll be talking about. So first, we'll start by covering site updates, and then we'll discuss the top stories in data privacy and cybersecurity. Next, we'll explore some trending posts on the Privacy Guides forum, and finally, we'll answer viewer questions. So if you have a question for us and you want us to answer it, please leave a comment in the forum thread or on the YouTube chat. So, with that being said, let's transition into the site updates for this week. And this week, I am joined by Kevin, who's our community and news intern. So how are you, Kevin?
Oh, I'm doing well. Thank you so much, Jordan, for introducing me. So hey, everyone. If you've been active on the forum, you've seen a few of my posts and news articles I've shared previously. I honestly love my time with Privacy Guides, and I'm so glad to know that I am working here for another 6 months. Yay! But yeah, anyways, as for site updates, of course, there hasn't been anything noteworthy. We don't have any change logs so far. No PRs were merged. So as far, I'm glad to say that we have nothing but stay tight for future announcements. As for trending posts, so far we have one trending post that you might have noticed, specifically about Proton Meet. However, it'll be a little cheating to discuss this too early, so I'm going to wait a bit before I announce it. But first off, I want to actually introduce a recent article written by our staff writer M. So if we look at the article right now, it's about privacy washing. You might have heard a few topics about privacy washing in the past. It's not as common as something like greenwashing or eco-washing or any other potential washings out there, but privacy washing is essentially this marketing concept. You might notice it started with Apple, but it kind of spread to other tech companies, big or small, even dedicated companies within the VPN industry or so forth. Essentially, what M wrote here, it's really important if you ever want to figure out which services to use for your own workflow, whether you're trying to look for a VPN or trying to install a new operating system, or hell, even enjoy the fruits of the open source community. Privacy washing is something you should definitely learn about and try to make sure to do your research before actively committing to one service or product. It's an amazing read. I highly recommend it. Anyways, I think this is a good segment to our next article, actually, but not written by M, but rather a lack of an article, actually. A really important news development. I want to introduce Proton Meet. Now, I want to emphasize that Proton Meet is kind of like Zoom, you might say, or Google Meets, or Microsoft Teams. It's this supposedly new private way to actually meet with your colleagues or your local team without the hassle of dealing with these proprietary big tech ecosystems. Right now it's in closed beta testing, and for some reason Proton didn't even announce it in the first place. The website wasn't live until a few days ago, and it took one of our staff members to actually stumble upon it in their own visionary plan. So as of right now, we don't really know a lot about it, but based off what we know from the forum and our personal experimentation with it, it appears to be entirely browser-based like Google Meets. It's surprisingly has really good video quality. A lot of complaints I heard about Signal, at least, was that the video quality isn't as consistently good across different computers. So I'm really glad to know that Proton Meet actually does have acceptable video quality and call quality. As of right now, I believe it is based off the live kit open source platform. You might notice it's a little too AI-y. I don't know the correct term for it, but it turns out like it's actually be quite useful for like like a company like Proton to easily like break into the space of developing their own tools. So who knows? Maybe like it is not a mistake to actually use LiveKit, despite the AI nonsense that they're implementing. But yeah, I think like so far though, like we're still like trying to like see if like whether or not we have an official like review of Proton Meet in the future. I think it's a really good opportunity for us to like, write a new review article on it. Perhaps like one of the full-time staff members can get their hands on a an enterprise or visionary plan and figure out, hey, is Proton Meet worth it? How is it compared to other products out there like Signal or Brave Talk or even Jetsy? Anyways, I'd like to pass on to Jordan. Actually, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I was just kind of surprised like how fast Proton has been rolling out a lot of their tools. Because I remember we saw that they had a launch of their other product, their Lumo AI product. And I think a lot of people were assuming that they were like sort of focusing on their previous products and trying to improve them. Because I don't know about you, but like a lot of times when when we're using these sort of privacy oriented products, a lot of times they have like, gaps in features and functionality that you would expect in a lot of software that isn't privacy respecting, and they're kind of missing that, those sort of features. So I was sort of expecting them to be focusing more on like improving their existing products. So when I heard they'd released yet another product, because if you remember, they just released Proton Auth, like, I don't know, like a couple of weeks ago, it feels like.
Yeah, I think it's was spinned off from the Proton Pass app. So it always, I guess the underlying like way of how Proton Auth works has always been there, but the extra difference is that it's not an official app until recently. So I guess it must not been too much work for them to like at least spin it off. But I was like surprised at Proton Meet though. I think like I am definitely concerned about the lack of depth instead of breadth. I know that we want to have an alternative ecosystem for enterprise or nonprofit spaces, but at the end of the day, we can't get these customers if you don't have a solid quality products. And so far, some of the frustrations I had with Proton, as a Proton user myself, is firstly, why is the web app so darn slow? And secondly, like, why can't I use like download certain apps on the operating systems I use? Like, I use like almost everything: Windows, Mac OS, iPhone, and Linux. And the fact that I can't even get Proton Drive on a Linux installation is honestly like absurd. But then again, though, like there are always like workarounds. I notice, like depending on like what you do own and use. But at the end of the day, it's like it's not a seamless experience as Google Drive, and where the ecosystem not only is already present, but there's an incentive for like smaller nonprofits, to actually hop onto Google and free plan and be able to successfully do everything within the Google ecosystem. It is not as seamless with Proton Meet, and I wish that they focus more on feature parity rather than trying to get this like ecosystem like built up before it's not even like perfect yet.
Yeah, I think I share like the same like concerns, right? Like Google is kind of like in a position, right? Like you said, with like the free plans for like non-profits, like they're like kind of cornering the market a little bit. Like they're trying to get these like organizations that want to help the world and improve society, and they're trying to like get them in on these free plans, and then probably later down the line they're going to probably switch that to a paid plan. But Proton's sort of in an interesting spot where it actually costs more and you get less features, so it's kind of like a pretty hard sell, at least for these sort of organizations. So I mean, I'd like to see them get a Linux client for Proton Drive, definitely. But I guess coming back to like Proton Meet in particular, because we don't really have so much information about it right now. I think one thing that people are discussing that I think we should cover is people are saying that it was built on Jitsi Meet. It's not. It's built on LiveKit, like Kevin said. It's So if I just switch over to this page here, this is kind of what it is. It's like a WebRTC like setup. And as far as what we were able to tell, it's actually running on LiveKit's infrastructure. So it's not actually hosted by Proton themselves. Which is interesting because a lot of times we would assume that, everything that Proton has is running on, servers in Switzerland with strict data privacy controls. But this time we're seeing them possibly, outsourcing that to a third party, which I guess is interesting, but I guess because of the encryption that they're saying this has, it may not be a big concern. But what do you think about this, Kevin?
Having read through their privacy policy, they definitely recognize and wrote down that your data, when it's in the hands of contractors or third parties, they're not responsible for it. It is written clear, in their privacy policy. While there is definitely some comfort in knowing that encryption will help protect your conversations and your calls, I definitely do want you to be hesitant before adopting, a Proton Meet. If you do have these higher level subscriptions plans with Proton, be cautious. Do note that if there is a breach, Proton isn't technically responsible for it if it's hosted on LiveKit's platform completely. Then again, I could be wrong. Perhaps there is some sort of responsibility and liability that Proton has, but definitely keep in mind this isn't something to rely on until it is officially released to the public.
Yeah, and I think I know neither of us have Proton Visionary accounts, but so we've not really had a chance to take a look at this super in depth, but there was some discussion on the forum. So if you're interested in learning a bit more about this, and there was some people posting screenshots of what it looks like. So if you're interested in that, then definitely check that out. But it sounds like I've just got a message here. We're having a bit of a technical issue. Apparently I'm echoing through your speakers, Kevin.
Oh yes, I'm gonna mute myself every time Jordan talks. Unfortunately, the Apple earbuds are not particularly meant for podcasting.
All right, yeah, that's unfortunate, but yeah, so sorry about the technical issues, everybody. This is a new setup with Kevin, so we're just trying our best here. But thank you all for letting me know and keeping us up to date on that. Thank you. All right, so with that being said, I feel like we've kind of talked about that quite a bit, unless there's anything else you want to add, Kevin?
No, I think recognizes that we haven't really gotten access to Proton Meet yet, so there isn't really a lot for us to test out, unfortunately, in this live stream, but stay tuned for more information.
All right, so with that being said, let's move on to the next story here, and that is about Google's antitrust case. So I guess if you haven't already been following the news on this, Google's kind of been getting, attacked by the US government for being an illegal monopoly. So basically they have too many different parts of the internet ecosystem all under their own umbrella. And I guess we can all kind of understand why that might be a bad problem. Having a single company that has so many different sections of the internet under their control is quite concerning. I mean, centralization is a problem, and especially if it's the largest advertiser in the world. So let me just quickly quote from the story here. Google will not be forced to break up its search business, but a federal judge has tentatively ordered other changes to the tech giant's business practices to keep it from further anti-competitive behavior. So I think this is kind of interesting because in a lot of cases, we don't really see a huge amount of, I guess, crackdown on these large companies that have all this control. And I feel like in the last couple of years, we've really started to see this all come to a head. And in particular, this article says that the Remedies on Tuesday would bar Google from entering or maintaining exclusive deals that tie to the distribution of Search, Chrome, Google Assistant, or Gemini to other apps or revenue arrangements. So they put an example here. For example, Google wouldn't be able to condition Play Store licensing on the distribution of certain apps or tie revenue share payments to keeping certain apps. So basically, they're kind of getting restricted from the amount of like control they have over like the Play Store, for instance. They can't force people to only upload their apps to the Play Store, and it's kind of a good thing, I think, that this is finally happening. But I think I would have liked to see more happen here, because it does feel like there's not really a huge amount of motion when it comes to this, especially when Google has so much like control over everything. Like we're talking about like Chrome, Android, Google Search, the most popular search engine, the most popular browser, the most popular phone operating system. It's a lot all for one company to have control over. And in this, it seems like quite a tame resolution to this, but they haven't issued a final judgment. So they need to meet and confer and submit a revised final judgment by September 10th. So at least these like preliminary changes that they're being forced to make are in a good direction, but I think I would like to see a lot more happening here.
I definitely do think that one potential good thing that could come out of this story, even though it was a very disappointing ruling, was that luckily enough, like a nonprofit like Firefox could actually survive like, on a financial standpoint. Um, I believe that in the article, like, Apple stock like actually like increased because it could actually continue its agreement with Google. Um, I definitely do think though like it was a net benefit, at least for the fact that yes, Firefox, because Mozilla can definitely still survive like as an organization financially speaking. Um, but however, though, like, it definitely is a bit disappointing, at least from a monopolistic standpoint as well, because at the end of the day, no one can have this amount of power. Um, and I definitely do wish that despite like some of these limitations of breaking up with Google, um, I wish it could have been done more. Like something better at least could come out of it. For example, though, like something that I do want to like at least talk about is at least the role of default apps within like a, let's say like a standard stock Android installation, for example. Like I was just wondering though, would that be impacted at all? You think, Jordan?
So I think in this case, like they're already sort of forcing this in Europe, and I think this sort of act is only applicable to like the company globally, I guess, because if the change happens in the US, I feel like it does kind of end up becoming a worldwide thing. So basically, if you read this article, they were talking about the remedies that were happening in April, and the judge basically mentioned the DMA, which is the Digital Markets Act, which basically is like what you were saying, like having apps require alternatives to pop up. So like, for instance, if you have an Android phone, the default browser isn't just Chrome. It like if you press the Chrome button, it actually gives you a list of apps that you could choose instead of Chrome, because yeah, it is kind of a tricky situation when you own the operating system. Basically, you're kind of in a position where you can just put your browser ahead of everyone else's. So that is kind of a problem, right? And personally, I do think that is the right way to go, because having a app just by default on a device doesn't really give people the choice that they should have, because a lot of people don't realize that they can install an alternative browser, that there are better options than Chrome. A lot of people just keep the default browser. So I think putting that choice directly in front of them is exactly what we need. And I mean, if there's a good list of apps there that are privacy respecting, I mean, a lot of people will probably pick that over Chrome, because there's like ad blocking tools built into Brave, or like Firefox has tracking protection by default. So I don't know. I think that sort of change would be great, but it doesn't look like that sort of thing is going to happen, especially in the US, because they seem a lot more tame compared to the European regulators. So I don't know, it's kind of unfortunate that like these changes haven't been so impactful. Like I think at one point we were thinking that Android and Google were actually going to be split apart. And we're seeing like, all the changes with Android where they've stopped releasing the Pixel device trees and all sorts of things. And that's sort of caused a problem with like custom operating systems. So it's kind of concerning that this didn't actually do a whole lot because it feels very I don't know, minimal, I would say, compared to like what we're seeing with the DMA, which is like forcing companies to like drastically re you know reconfigure their operating system to actually put people's choices first. So yeah, this is kind of an interesting development, but also I feel like it could go a lot further. It's like in a lot of cases, like we see like these companies getting fined like $100 million, but that's like pennies to them. So it's a bit frustrating that, especially in the US, there's not really a whole lot of like push to actually force these companies to put people first and not, have an illegal monopoly, but that is the case, I guess.
Yeah, I believe Google was fined just today, or the past few hours, like a few $1 billion by the EU. Again, I feel like this is the 10th time I've posted about this in the forum and read about it. So it doesn't really mean anything to these companies. I agree 100%. Um, Something that I also do want to like move on to, at least within this article, would be uh, Google being forced to share search data with potential competitors. On the form itself, that I mentioned that I was concerned with a few things. Yes, while this could potentially allow something like Brave Search or DuckDuckGo to potentially obtain better results from this shared data, I do think that the main benefactors from this would be these AI based, or actually more accurately say, LLM based browsers are currently being developed or have already been developed. It's like Perplexity from OpenAI of some sorts, like, where they would essentially use a Chromium based browser and integrate their LLM within it. And I think that's particularly concerning because this deal could potentially give these startups a way to essentially build their own uh, Chrome competitor, based on Chrome, of course. But still, it's incredibly dangerous to know that this could potentially help these AI startups build a even more privacy-invasive browser than Chrome, which is insane if you think about it. So I definitely have mixed feelings about this for sure. Maybe in the future, we don't really know for sure if like these smaller, like privacy-focused search engines like um, DuckDuckGo or Brave Search could potentially improve their search results. Um, but yeah, I think that's all I have at least for that. Jordan, do you have any opinions on that specific topic?
I think you brought up that good point that I forgot to mention, like previously, was like they have to share search index and user interaction data with qualified competitors. So, I mean, how's that going to work? I mean, is that meaning that they're going to have to share like their search engine index? Like what exactly does that mean? I think it'll be interesting to see. And I mean, personally, I use DuckDuckGo like pretty much as the only like search engine that I use, and I've never had any problems with like search queries not giving me the right things. So I mean, if it helps like competitors to get on the same level as Google, I feel like at this point Google actually kind of sucks for searching for things. Like you get like half a page of ads, sponsored like shopping posts, and then like a Gemini search like summary. It's like so bad. So I don't know. I don't know if that'll help or if that'll be an issue. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. But also, I feel like a lot of the competitors to Google aren't really like trying to do the same thing because they realize it's kind of a terrible business model. Like we're seeing with DuckDuckGo and Brave Search, they don't use like ads, like tracking ads. They just use like general based ads on people's search queries. So I don't know if this will even help them because, they don't really need those like ad syndication services, to like offer people that then. That's not really their business model. So it's definitely interesting, but yeah, I feel like we should probably move on to the next topic here, though.
Oh yes, for sure. So for this article, we're focusing on this new open source LLM created by Switzerland of all things. It's called Apertus. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I'm gonna use both of them interchangeably, but researchers from not only like some federal universities, just ETH Zurich and the Swiss National Supercomputing Center and the EPFL, using Swiss funding from the Swiss AI Initiative, they have unveiled Apertus, a fully open source, multilingual, large language model built with transparency, inclusiveness, and compliance at its core. Um, and one surprising thing about this is that while yes, there are a lot of open source LLMs out there, there are some services that offer wrappers where they take an existing, let's say, model such as like OpenAI, ChatGPT, GPT-5, um, Llama, or Mistral, and they just simply like create a wrapper for it, and they promise not to share your personal information with these models. Of course, your search data will still be like available to the model, but I think it definitely does depend on each service. Apertus is different in which it does not do so by default. It will not collect your information. Your search data will not be used for training purposes, apparently. And every single training data that's fed to Apertus is all must be publicly available, and it's been filtered to exclude personal information, and actually will honor opt-out signals from content sources. This means that, let's say in the past, let's say you're a blogger who clearly said, please do not train my data, use my blog to train the data. Apertus will actually respect that. So not only it is designed with privacy and security by default, it also is ethically sourced, which is huge. I would say I think like there's a lot of really good potential with Apertus if it ever becomes adopted by the mainstream. However, something I have noticed personally, at least from testing out, if you go through like a website such as Public AI Inference Utility or Hugging Face, essentially, if you're to test it out, I have noticed personally through my own testing, it's not the best thing in the world. It's very formal, very cold, and not necessarily the most intelligent in regards to like, personal conversations or advice. However, I think it's a really good start, though. I think because it definitely had less training data to feed on. So I do think that given enough time, I think Apertus could be a shining light and an example for how LLM should actually be developed. Not only is it being open source, but designed with security, privacy in mind. But yeah, Jordan, do you have any thoughts on it? Have you tested Apertus out before, or is this your first time coming across this?
Okay, well, I feel like I'm gonna be the opposite to like your feelings here, but I'm really not a fan of like artificial intelligences and especially LLMs, but I think this is a step in the right direction at least. I think one of the main concerns that I have is this is opt out. I feel like LLMs should be opt in instead of opt out because, uh, I think a lot of times the signaling on whether you want your blog post or your website to be scraped and used for AI training is not particularly clear, and a lot of times it's, I don't know, a lot of websites don't actually have a signal saying they would prefer not to or they would prefer. And I think it's basically, wholesale scraping the entire internet. A lot of websites are probably not going to have these signals set up. So is that the worst thing ever? Is that better than what we already have? Yes. But I think, it's definitely an interesting development. And I think another thing that people at least haven't really talked about is like the electricity usage and the computing power that's required for training these models is also pretty high, and it's not particularly great for the environment to run these. So that's like the concern that I have about this sort of thing. I mean, it's a good improvement over what we already have, which is like OpenAI, like scraping the entire internet just to basically like create new models, which, you know, we've already seen this is kind of a problem. Like a lot of websites are getting like taken down by AI scrapers because everything is like constantly visiting their website. So, I mean, that's good, right? But also kind of the same thing that we've seen with Lumo is you kind of have to trust the company that runs the model because you still have to send plain text queries to the model for it to be processed. So you're basically taking their word that this isn't going to be used for training or it's not going to be stored for a long time. And while this is definitely an improvement over like OpenAI or like Gemini or like any of these other models that are out there, I think that in general, I feel like this seems like, I don't know, I feel like I would feel a bit weird about how my tax dollars are going to fund like some AI thing. I'm not sure if I would be that happy about it, personally, but that's kind of a personal opinion, I guess. But yeah, I think this is definitely an improvement over what we've seen before, but I don't really see this as that useful personally.
Yeah, and I agree 100%. I think like this whole AI craze is honestly overwhelming, but also underwhelming at the same time. You know, overwhelming in the sense that why is everyone talking about AI? Why is every single marketing um, campaign using AI? Like I'm tired of seeing it everywhere, and it's taking all the water. Why use it? Um, I do think, however, is that Apertus is a very interesting trend within the entire, I would say, Swiss sovereign software, at least observation I've noticed, in which we see apps like Threema, we see Treasury, which is developed by the Swiss Post, and we see now Apertus, which is developed by an actual AI initiative operated by the Swiss government, and we see here is like this ecosystem. We're starting to see an ecosystem of Swiss sovereign software where under the pretense of digital sovereignty, we're seeing the Swiss government actively fund or indirectly support the development of all of these companies and platforms which operate with support of the Swiss government, but also within European borders. So I do think though it's like if there is any benefit towards our purchase, it's definitely from a digital sovereignty perspective. If you're European and you don't trust the models developed by Chinese or American scientists, I do think that purchase is definitely good if you're planning to run, let's say, a local model, for example, especially the smaller parameter ones with around, like, I believe, 8 billion parameters. Yeah, 8 billion parameter one. So maybe if you're not so much of a AI skeptic, but you still want to use a Swiss or European-based model, I do think like Apertus could potentially scratch that niche. However, nothing is perfect. I do believe that regardless of whether it's a platform claims to be ethically sourced or not, Apertus is still at the end of the day a LLM that takes other people's work as its training data, regardless of whether or not it's opt in or opt out, and consumes quite a lot of resources. And there's also the ethical concerns of using AI in the first place. So I definitely do agree with the fact that like at the end of the day, LLMs are a huge problem nowadays. However, I think Apertus has its own uses depending on your specific usage cases. If you're a European trying to like implement a local model, perhaps Apertus can be good for you. If you're living outside of Europe and you need a private solution, maybe AI isn't really the solution for you, generally speaking.
No, I agree. And I think you touched on a good point there. It's like, if you download this model and you use it locally, I feel like there's really no concern there from a privacy perspective, but it's more that I'm sort of have a problem with like providers, like online providers like Lumo or like DuckDuckGo's chat thing, or Brave's system. I'm more concerned about like the data being, sent to another server in plain text, especially because a lot of people seem to think that it's like a magical box, and like they can like, you know, paste secrets in there and stuff, and it's kind of a bit of a security risk. So I mean, if you're running that locally, I feel like the concerns are limited, at least from a privacy and security perspective. And if you also want to have something that's at least somewhat more ethical than, I don't know, a model that just scrapes the entire internet, I feel like this would be a decent option if you're concerned about that. But also, I would consider whether you actually need an AI model in the first place. But with that being said, I feel like we've talked about this for quite a while here. This is the next story we're going to talk about. This is about Venezuela's president thinks American spies can't hack Huawei phones. So basically, during a press conference on Monday, Venezuela's president Nicolas Maduro showed off a Huawei phone that China's President Xi Jinping gifted him, calling it the best phone in the world, and making a bold claim. And this is a quote from Maduro: "The Americans can't hack it, neither their spy planes nor their satellites." So this phone in particular that he was holding up was apparently a Mate X5, which is a foldable phone released by Huawei in 2024. And I think this is kind of an interesting story, right? Because uh, I'm not really sure whether this is like, I don't know. I feel like this might be slightly politically, you know, involved here because, you know, I feel like the difference is, especially with like Android phones, I feel like um the the difference between like a Huawei and a Google Pixel, like they're both collecting like large amounts of data. They're both running closed source operating systems. I feel like the difference is really just behind who makes them. Um, so in this case, it's made by Huawei, which is a Chinese company, and with a Google Pixel, it would be Google, which is an American company. So I mean, it's interesting that I'm not really sure if there's like any specific things that Huawei does over like an Android, like a Google Pixel Android. But I do know they have their own like whole ecosystem of like Harmony OS, and they have like their own alternative to the Play Store. But it's definitely like, it seems like a move where these like South American countries are trying to move away from like US big tech companies. And in this case, they're going for like the Chinese alternatives. But I feel like you probably have a little bit more to add here, Kevin.
Yes, I do think though, like, if you're deciding between a Huawei phone and literally any other device, and your main purpose is used for consumer related tasks like calling your family, checking up on friends, or accessing banking information, I do not recommend doing so. There's a difference between a government official owning a Huawei phone, be they Chinese or from another country, um, and having that device not only managed by, you know, the government IT team, but also probably specifically like hardened and managed for corporate use. Corporate meaning like enterprise use, I'd say. Um, just because you may align away from a specific government doesn't necessarily mean that it's always the best option for consumer usage. Huawei phones not only they collect a lot of information, and they're much more vulnerable to malware compared to a Google Pixel, which really receives faster updates once received by Google, and also is further hardened by the local security chip, the Tensor chip, not the Tensor, sorry, the Titan M chip. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Sorry.
Yeah, my bad. My apologies for misspeaking. Um, if you do, however, want to oppose like certain big tech companies because of their geopolitical alignment, I want you to at least keep that in mind, that while you're not, banned from using, Huawei phones, of course, if you believe it fits a certain usage case, it is certainly not as secure or private as a Google Pixel with, a custom ROM like Graphene OS, for example, or even an iPhone if you like configure some settings. you are not most likely working in the government, having your phone being managed by your government. Um, Make sure to do your research and try to avoid geopolitical alignment as your main source of information. Um, of course, you can see with President Maduro, he thinks spy planes and satellites can hack like phones, which is not necessarily a reliable thing to say. But I do think though, like if you're afraid of, let's say, certain devices having 0 days and backdoors implemented by, an opposing nation state, it's not unreasonable to, get, let's say, a Huawei phone, for example, if you're afraid of U.S. interference. The issues, of course, firstly, you're not a government official, most likely, and you do not, have the means to even be targeted by it in the first place. Most likely, you won't be targeted by the U.S. government just because you live in some country. Um, so, just to summarize this in short, if you're not President Maduro, please do not get a Huawei phone. If you are President Maduro, or you work for a similar form of governmental role, consider it, but make sure to harden it a bit, have it be managed by your IT team, and make sure that it's actually like hardened for official usage. And about this whole Venezuela article.
Yeah, no, good points. I guess I didn't really get into it, but like, yeah, like, of course, back here at like Privacy Guides, we're gonna recommend, open source like operating systems on your Android device. Like, I think Harmony OS, Google Pixel, like on stock Android, these are like pretty not great for your privacy. It's just basically like, which terrible company do you want to trust with your data? Like, a Chinese one or an American one. So I mean, yeah, obviously, you're going to be a lot better off with like an Android phone with like Graphene OS, or like Kevin said, an iPhone maybe, with like, some additional like hardening and stuff. But I think, uh, I don't think there's anything particularly unhackable about Huawei devices. I don't think they have like the same level of security like Kevin said with like the Titan chips and stuff. But it's good to see that even like Huawei is like committing to have like regular security updates every month. So, you got to give them props there. Like they are trying to make sure their devices are at least hitting that baseline, security patch every month. So, I mean, yeah, like Kevin said, this is like a geopolitical thing. Like I'm sure that this whole display was kind of, in a gesture towards like, saying that, they want to trust China with their information over America, which, I don't really know too much about the whole situation there, but it seems like they don't really like the US. So, I mean, it kind of makes sense why they're doing this whole display. But yeah, I think when it comes to this sort of thing, obviously, uh, we're going to recommend open source Android, not some like closed source like Google Pixel stock Android or Harmony OS running on a Huawei phone. So yeah, I don't think there's like a huge amount to add there. But with that being said, I feel like we're kind of coming to the end of these news articles here. So I guess we're kind of moving into the Q&A section of this stream. So if anyone has any questions they want us to answer, definitely leave those in the forum or in the YouTube chat and we'll get to them. But I can see there was a comment on the forum from Johnny Gossamer, I believe, who's our basically our prolific commenter on these live streams. So thank you, Johnny, for leaving a comment. So can you share any details for Proton Meet that you can gather? Also share your thoughts on it and where you think Proton may be going with this new suite of tools coming out this year. So I feel like we've talked about this already a little bit, but I feel like this is sort of a move by Proton to sort of be a replacement of Google, basically. You can kind of tell because they're making their products sort of be, a copy of like Google suite of tools. Like for instance, Proton Meet sounds very similar to Google Meet. So I mean, and also the logo looks very similar. So I don't know, I feel like they are trying to like move towards being like a replacement for people to basically escape Google, I guess. And one of their like simple things that they can do is add, a live live chat video conferencing solution, and that kind of covers them on that front, and they don't have to rely on like some third party like Zoom or Google Meet or Jitsi or anything like that. They can have like their own like setup. So that's how I feel like this direction is going. What about you, Kevin? What do you think?
I definitely do agree with everything you said. Proton is trying too hard to expand their feature set to a point where, yes, you're trying to be a reliable alternative to Microsoft 365 and Google Drive, but without exploring and building upon the products you already have, you simply just won't get any reliable users at the end of the day. Um, I think like while Proton Meet is an actual niche that needs to be like explored upon, um, I do want to personally test it out and do a proper review before like commenting on any potential insights that Proton Meet may have. Um, I still think it's incredibly important for Proton Meet to exist. Of course, it's at least from like at least what I've observed in the forum, people really do like a lot of its features, and the fact that it's browser based means that potentially there could be some way for non-Proton users to access Proton Meet and attend calls still. In fact, I believe it already is a feature. Um, so just because of that, personally, like I think it's amazing. Um, but just because if Proton finally hit a niche that it could potentially utilize, doesn't necessarily mean that it's necessarily the smartest decision without properly like developing their products, of course. But then again, who knows? Maybe after like a proper like review and a few test calls, maybe I'll change my mind on it. But yeah, I do think, however, that regardless of Proton Meet's like potential application, its usefulness, I think we want to focus more on the company itself, like Proton, and its potential mistakes of expanding too quickly for its own good.
No, 100%. I agree about like, expanding too quickly. I think that personally, I kind of just wish they would focus on like a single product and like make it really good, instead of having like a lot of different options, because like a lot of it is stuff that I can't use yet because it doesn't have the features that I need. Like for example, like I feel like their mail product is like pretty feature complete at this point. Like basically any feature that you would think would be in other software is basically available. But there's like issues with, the mobile apps, the search is just terrible, or like um there's issues with the calendar app not really having any features. Like it's very, very bare minimum. So I don't know. I share the same concern. I think they are sort of expanding into a lot of these areas. I mean, I'm sure they have separate development teams across all these different products, but it's concerning, especially when we've seen three products in like, what is it like? It feels like it's only been like 2 or 3 months and we've seen three different products get released. So I hope they are able to maintain all this and make sure that they can keep all the apps working. But it seems like at least the products they've released so far have been like sort of not to the same like privacy standards of previous ones. Like at least with Lumo, there's concerns about the open source status of it. There's like concerns over the data that they're collecting with it, because it's not secured in the same way that all their other software is. They actually do have the plain text queries that you make to the Lumo AI. So, um, and like we said with the Proton Meet, it's hosted by LiveKit, which isn't Proton themselves. So there's, concerns over that because they don't have as strict control over it as they do on their own servers. So, um, I don't know if it's running on, actually, I should just say, I don't 100% know if the LiveKit system is running on their servers or if it's hosted by LiveKit themselves. I don't actually know for certain, so don't quote me on that, but um, that's kind of what I was thinking. Did you see any, did you see any other questions there that you thought we should answer, Kevin?
Let me actually pull it up because I think I actually clicked out of it while I was trying to like search through all these articles. Um, you can pick one question for now, and I'll try to like, get back on track.
All right, no problem. So we got a comment here from Levin Leo. I'm sorry if I butchered your name. Which AI is the best for privacy? So I would say if you have to use an AI, I would use a local AI. Basically, we do have like a section on our website for like AI models and stuff. So let me just quickly get that open here. Give me a second. Okay, it's in the recommended tools section. And there is a section for, I feel like we do have a section for this. Right, Kevin?
Yes, we do. It's under recommendations. I can post it in the chat actually.
That would be.
Yes. Is it under self-hosting? No, it's not. Wow. Okay. Software. Ooh, okay, we will send it very shortly. Don't you worry about it. But yeah, I definitely do agree that self-hosting is definitely the best way going forward. However, I want to note that it's incredibly expensive to do so. If you want to have the same feature parity with, let's say, ChatGPT 5, for example, or Claude. And if you really, really want to use, Claude or ChatGPT more privately, you could technically use something like Duck AI or use Lumo for Mistral as a Mistral front end. So the issue is, of course, you're still sending your chats to the model itself. It's just supposedly not linked to your personal identity. But then again, though, it really depends on your threat model and whether or not, like, how important, or whether or not you care about your chats being, available to the LM in question. So please don't type in your like social security number or the equivalent of it in your country into like Duck AI, for example, because at the end of the day, that number is still being uploaded. It just won't be under your name, but obviously, you don't want that information out there. But that's all I have to really say, though. If you do want to learn more about self-hosting your own instance of an LLM, I do believe there's a lot of people in the forum that's willing to help you get set up or figure out which hardware to purchase or what specific GPU to buy, how to actually get it running in the first place. I think there's a lot of people in the forum that's willing to help you out and get it set up if you feel like you have resources to build your own personal self-hosted LLM solution.
Yeah, definitely. If you're interested in that sort of thing, I would check that out. And also, we do have this. I finally found the page. Sorry about that. It's on the AI chat page in recommendations, so in the software section. So I guess we can also talk about like hardware recommendations. So at least someone's put together this here on our website, and it looks like if you want like a 70B model, that's going to be 72 gigabytes of RAM at minimum. And with a GPU with VRAM. So like Kevin said, this is like the requirements for this sort of thing are pretty high. So I would definitely think about this, but also maybe check out some of those other ones, especially if you're just using it for like random stuff. I feel like it's not too much of an issue, but if it's like sort of, editing documents that have sensitive information, I would definitely not use like a third-party service. This is basically something you have to use like a local model for because you definitely don't want that data being shared with like, a third-party company. And I think there might be another question here if you want to pick one out, Kevin.
Of course, yes. At least on the YouTube chat, I noticed this user by the name of Vidya Kendran said, Hi, I'm pretty much a newbie when it comes to privacy space, but I work in film and a lot of our creative work now happens through cloud-based platforms. Do tools like Brave and DuckDuckGo offer real protection against passive data collection happening in the background, or are they more focused on general web browsing and privacy? Um, First off, amazing question, Vidya, and welcome to our community. I'm really glad to have you here. So I do want to emphasize that Brave and DuckDuckGo won't necessarily protect you 100% when you're, let's say, accessing your video files on Google Drive, for example. Yes, it could help, you know, protect you against trackers, especially when it's a browsing cookie. Which think of it as like a file that tracks you across web pages that you click on. Well, it may be able to block some of these like cookies from like tracking you from across and outside of this Google Drive or Microsoft website instance. You're still, of course, using the service, right? So anything you do within these proprietary platforms will still, track you in some way. And that's the best way I can probably say in layman's terms. The best way I could probably describe it to you is Brave, obviously more protection against trackers by default, as it is a browsing. Think of it as a competitor to Google Chrome, and DuckDuckGo being a more private way to search the internet. So the initial search won't be used for advertising, for example. It won't be used against you. I'd say if your concern is preventing advertising, tracking you, and building a profile of your personal information. So I would say yes, they're based off general web browsing privacy. However, I'm not saying that these can't help you when you do need to access certain websites like Google Drive or Microsoft 365. Because of course, as a filmmaker, you really need to access these services to store your files. However, I do want to encourage, ask this question to Jordan, because Jordan does a lot of video edits as well as their main role. And do you have any advice for Widya?
I think you're kind of in a tricky spot, right? Like a lot of the sort of collaboration tools are cloud-based, right? And I think we can sort of, try to use like the most ethical tools. Like I try to at least, use DaVinci Resolve instead of Adobe. But it's not always we're not always in a position to use alternative software. And I think especially if you're being taught in school and as a tertiary degree how to use Adobe software, it feels a bit, I don't know, I guess a bit weird to have to pivot to some alternative software. So I mean, we're kind of in a tricky spot right now where we have to use, Adobe, who's got terrible business practices and that sort of thing, but they are sort of at the pinnacle of creative software. So unfortunately, we still have to give them money every month. So I mean, it's a tricky situation, and at least personally, I've been trying to get better at using alternative versions of software. Like instead of Adobe Photoshop, I'll use Affinity Photo instead, and for video editing, I'll use DaVinci Resolve instead of Premiere Pro. But there is, alternatives. There's certain pieces of software that there just isn't a good alternative to. So I mean, you kind of have to just do what you can. You just have to, make a compromise there and have to use that software. So it's kind of a sucky situation, but if there's certain software that you can't really swap out for something a bit more ethical that doesn't track you constantly, um, you kind of have to just do that, I guess. And yeah, I mean, I agree with what you said about tracking and Brave search versus DuckDuckGo. I agree. That does stop some passive tracking that Google does. But I think also switching to a browser that actually sort of restricts the amount that websites can track you is also a pretty important thing. So switching your search engine is also important, but your browser, the thing that actually controls how you appear to websites, how your information is shared with websites, is pretty important. And if you're using something like a Brave browser or Firefox or Molvad browser, you're going to have significantly better protection against tracking than Google Chrome, but you're using DuckDuckGo search. So I mean, even if you were using Google search in Brave, you would still have pretty good protection against web tracking. So I think it's important to have a layer of tools working all at the same time to protect you, rather than just using a single one. I guess having a look here at the forum again, let's see. Looks like we got a comment from Hello Echo. Thanks for sending a comment about the echo issue. Trying our best here. And yes, this is Kevin's first time appearing on the This Week in Privacy live stream. We're hopefully going to do like every second week with Kevin. So just to switch it up, I think it's good to have sort of different people on. And this question from Hello Echo is, Signal's server-side code is largely open source with only a few components like anti-spam remaining proprietary. Whereas Proton's services Mail, Drive, VPN, and Pass keeps their backend closed. Despite this difference, Privacy Guides has recommended multiple Proton services even though Proton isn't as fully open source as Signal. Is Proton's lack of transparency problematic or cause concern? So I think this is sort of a tricky situation, right? Because I think when we talk about like at least email services, we can kind of go into every single aspect of this, but I feel like a lot of email services, like let's say Tutor or mailbox.org, I think they don't really do that either. So we're really looking at like what is the best case scenario here, and at least in the case of mail, Proton is sort of the best case scenario where like the encryption process happens in your browser and that component is actually open source. So we at least know exactly how that encryption process works. The backend is less important, I would say, because, at least we know how exactly it's working and if that's sort of, if that's working correctly and whether they're using, up-to-date cryptography, like algorithms and such. So, I mean, I would prefer that they did open source the backend, but I can see there might be issues with doing that, like with spam and other things that you mentioned. But I think, there's also like the other apps that they've got, which is like Proton Pass. I think there definitely could be a little bit of a concern there because, um, Bitwarden does open source their backend and you can self-host it, whereas Proton Pass doesn't do that. So, I think that's a good distinction to be made. I'm not sure if that's actually being like presented on the website on the open source label, but I mean, I think because the way encryption works is less of a concern, but I'm happy to hear what you have to say as well, Kevin.
As for whether or not this lack of transparency is problematic or could potentially cause you concern, um, I do say that as much as I am a huge supporter of FOSS, like free and open source software, and I try to use it as much as possible, obviously there are some cases where for enterprise or commercial solutions, FOSS isn't always the best way forward. So unfortunately, yes, it's really hard to trust Proton just because we can't audit the code and figure out what they're actually doing on the back end. And I do believe that at least so far there hasn't been anything that may cause you to lose trust from Proton. So I guess the best way I can describe it is, unless you're willing to fully self-host everything using FOSS tools, have your own home lab, self-host your own email solution, there isn't particularly a way for you to trust, companies like Tuta or Proton. However, there's definitely a lot of faith to give, and there is a reason why we do recommend Proton on Privacy Guides, because so far they've been very reliable and one of the largest players in this space. If there's anything that is done that could revoke that trust, be assured that we will update our website accordingly and spread that information as much as possible. So that is the issue with closed source software. We don't really know what's going on, and we don't know if we're going to trust them or not. But just because we can't see what's going on doesn't mean that you can't trust them at all, of course. I think it's a matter of what is useful for your own personal situation and whether or not you need a guarantee that whatever you're using works. And it's definitely, at the end of the day, a personal decision and not necessarily like something that we can recommend to you.
Yeah, I think also there's like a lot of people that value like free and open source software quite highly. And if that's you, then, I think where like you stand on this, right? If Proton doesn't open source their backend and that makes you uncomfortable because you want to have everything be open source, then I think there are options for you. Like Kevin said, you can self-host things. You can, the Stalwart email server, that's one of the ones that we recommend. That allows you to have, a similar level of, encryption, inbox encryption, and all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, there are options. And if you're uncomfortable with any of this sort of not being as transparent as it could be, which it certainly could be more transparent than it is, but it's whether that transparency is actually worth it to Proton, which it doesn't really seem like it is. So it doesn't really seem like they'll be open sourcing their backend just because, it's probably a bit of a mess, to be honest. And that might take quite a lot of like cleaning up to get it ready for public publishing, but it doesn't seem like they're too interested in doing that right now. And I guess I can kind of understand why, because it's probably not a huge benefit to them. Whereas, all the encryption happens on your client. So really all they need to publish is the client side. So, I mean, it's interesting. I think, like Kevin said, if you don't trust Proton for any reason, then, there are other alternatives. And especially if there's like any problems that come up because of uh issues that they have, we're sort of relying on the community here to bring that forward so we can make the change on the website. So that's kind of what I was thinking about that post on the forum there. Do you see any other things we could talk about, or do you reckon this is sort of closing out here?
Apps and running them on Linux safely. Um, I would say though that while WageDroid might be quite outdated, it's a Linux container that runs, Android container runs fully off of Lineage OS, a version of it at least. Um, and while yes, like the actual container itself isn't the most secure thing in the world, the fact that everything runs within this WageDroid container means that it cannot easily access and damage your main Linux system. Of course, nothing's perfect, and I can definitely do see WageDroid could potentially bring a huge security risk. But I do say though that if this is something you must run, and you don't, let's say you don't own an Android phone, and you must be able to run it. I don't see why WageDroid couldn't be a potential solution for you. But if you're willing to spend, let's say, some money on a separate Android device, it could be anything, honestly. Ideally a Google Pixel, but a disposable device that if you just run an app, that physical separation, that physical compartmentalization is very important, and arguably much more secure than a potentially insecure WageDroid container. But then again, it's entirely up to your situation and whether or not that is an acceptable risk or not. That WageDroid runs a version of Android 13. But yeah, I think that's all we have for questions, I believe. I think we'll probably close it off, Jordan.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any not seeing anything. I think, I don't think there's really that many good options for like emulating Android on Linux. I mean, you could check out I'm pretty sure like Visual Studio, or there's like an Android Studio setup that allows you to have like an emulator and stuff. But I've tried WageDroid before, but it wasn't really that great. So I mean, I feel like there's not too many options that are like available, unfortunately. But yeah, I definitely try out like WageDroid. But yeah, I don't think there's any of the other like alternatives that come to mind. You could also try like x86 emulation, but then you might get limited by what apps you have. So it's kind of a tricky situation, but sorry we couldn't really have a better answer for that. It's just not something I'm super familiar with. But before we clear out the stream here, I did have something we wanted to talk about just before we finish up, because right now there's like quite a lot of problems happening in the EU, and that's with like chat control. Basically, they are trying to weaken encryption and allow like client-side scanning on people's devices to check for like child sexual abuse materials. So this is the website that I'm showing on screen. This is stopscanningme.eu, and basically there's a group of members who basically want to stop the European Parliament from implementing the client-side scanning. And I think it's pretty important that people are against this because this is pretty terrible for people's privacy. Having a government scanning your device for like child sexual abuse material is problematic, not only because, you shouldn't be allowing someone else to scan your device for like harmful material. It's also not very good at detecting that material either. So I feel like this is quite a, like, we've talked about like this sort of topic quite a lot now, and I feel like we've sort of run it into the ground, but this is sort of the arguments why you should care about this, and this is your private chats will be scanned, you won't be able to share anything remotely intimate without the risk of your messages, photos, and videos ending up in the hands of some government institution. The technology is known to fail. As a result, you may be accused of being a child sexual offender without having done anything wrong. And this isn't to say that, child sexual abuse is good or that we should allow it to happen, but it's obviously terrible and horrendous. But this sort of way to tackle it is just ineffective and it's harmful to people's privacy. So you should definitely be against this. And there's sort of a website that we talked about before, which is fightchatcontrol.eu. And this is basically a website that has all the representatives for every European member state that shows, which states are in opposition and which states are supporting it. So right now, apparently there is 6 states undecided and 15 member states supporting it. So definitely take a look. And if your country is on here and it says, that your government supports it or is undecided, definitely like click on one of these countries, and it gives you basically the members that you can basically call or email them to basically get them to change their mind, hopefully. It's definitely a little bit problematic that a lot of people seem to be supporting it. At least right now it says 15 is supporting it, so that's like a majority by quite a lot. So if you are in a country that is supporting this stuff, definitely get in contact with your MEP. And there's also this other website that was sent to me as well. This is sort of a description of how it's going to work. But do you have any thoughts on this as well, Kevin?
Um, I feel like you expressed that beautifully. Um, Child control is a massive threat to not just Europeans, but everyone across the world. And if this gets normalized, it won't stop at Europe, for sure. Um, if you do need resources, I'm sure Privacy Guys will release further content, further call to arms to make sure that this gets stopped. We have stopped child control before, but it keeps on coming back like an annoying fly. And based on what I've seen from past years, they've only have gotten worse. So if you do need any resources, we are more than happy to discuss this in the forum and give you anything you need to call your local representatives and make sure that child control is put to the ground.
Yeah, no, 100% agree with everything you said. I think we're, I guess, kind of spilling the beans a little bit here. We do have like an article about chat control in the works, and our journalist M is working on that right now. So definitely look out for that article, and it is definitely going to be something you can share with people. So if you're in the European Union and you're in one of these countries and people are sort of unsure about this whole thing that's being proposed, a lot of people are in support of this simply because, how could you not be? Do you support child sexual abuse? Like, it's kind of hard to be against this without sounding, like you want this to happen to children. We don't. We just think this is terrible for people's privacy and it's going to be harmful in our society. So it's important to get that across. And actually, I'd kind of like this little image that is made by Lorna Shoot. And let me just zoom in on this for a second so you can get a better view of it. So it's kind of explaining how the EU plans to do this whole like system, and basically it says the European Union is planning the general and indiscriminate monitoring of chat, email, and messenger conversations. They're basically proposing automatic screening of all chats, emails, and messenger content. Text and image analysis is done with artificial intelligence, and then attempted contacts with children and suspicious photos and videos are sent to the police automatically. So yeah, this is like when you look at how this is going to be implemented, you instantly think, oh God, this is like terrible, right? So I think it's important to like look at this from like the perspective of what this actually looks like in reality, and that is what it looks like in reality. And this website here, it's from Patrick Brea, who's basically the I think he's a member of the Pirate Party in the European Union. So there's this website just here about like, it's debunking myths about it. It's actually really quite well sourced and everything. So I definitely recommend checking out this article. I think it's quite interesting. Uh,
Has a lot of like very fascinating resources on how to actively reach out to like the members of European Parliament. Um, just as a side note, though, I think the Pirate Party is such a fascinating phenomenon, and I do think that like as much as I do like commend Europeans for being very heavily involved in the digital privacy space, forming actual political parties, for example, and almost being elected to power in certain countries like Czechia. Um, I do think, however, like with chat control and all that, I think we really need to like remove the notion that the European Union is a bastion for privacy and security. It's not. It's just kind of a different spin of things, at least compared to the U.S. version of what privacy and security is. But then again, I feel like that's probably another conversation for a future stream, potentially.
yeah, I think there's like different issues on like each side of the spectrum there, right? Like I don't think there's really is there like a pirate party in the US or
Very irrelevant. We have it's basically it's a two-party system, and they all have very conflicting views of what digital privacy means. I'd say.
right, yeah, especially because there's like the issue with basically no like national privacy laws or anything. But I mean there's different issues, right? I think it's a tricky space, and I don't think any country is really that like protected when it comes to like privacy, because like we saw with Switzerland, they're like planning to do like a similar thing to chat control. So it's like really no country is safe from this, it feels like. So that's kind of disappointing news about the chat control stuff, but we are on it. We've got M who's writing an article about it, and we're trying to like spread this as much as we can. So if you're in the European Union, check out the stopscanningme.eu website and also the fightchatcontrol.eu website. But I feel like we're kind of like dragging out the stream a little bit too long here, so apologies for that, everybody. We're going to kind of close it out here. So with that being said, we've kind of gone through a lot of the sections here, but I'm going to close out the stream right now. As always, all the updates from This Week in Privacy will be shared on the blog every week, so subscribe with your favorite RSS reader if you want to stay tuned. And also, for people who prefer audio, we're going to be trying a new podcast style recording, so there'll be an audio version available too. And as usual, this live streamed YouTube live stream will also be available later on PeerTube. And with that being said, if you enjoy like the sort of stuff we're working on and you want to support us, we are a non-profit and we rely on donations from people who think our work is important. So if you do like what we're doing here, please consider making a donation, and you can do that by visiting privacyguides.org and clicking the red heart icon in the top right hand corner. And with that being said, you can make a donation with cryptocurrency and also a credit card. So if that sounds interesting to you and you want to support our work here, please do consider making a donation. But with that being said, I feel like this has been a great week here with Kevin, and I hope you guys have enjoyed having a different guest on this week. So we'll see you next week.
Bye, everyone.